Hi everyone, Fox is here and welcome to my weekly wrap-up. This is going to be the wrap-up for 2 weeks between April 9th and April 22nd. Those were 2 weeks when my parents were visiting, so everything that you have seen up to this video was pre-recorded. So I'm back and now I'm filming again, and I was really surprised by the fact that I did manage to read something during those 2 weeks because, as you can imagine, I was trying to spend as much time as I could with my family, and I didn't really want to read anything big or chunky or anything that would require a lot of attention. So I was reading a lot of graphic novels and also short story collections, but I somehow managed to read quite a few things. So without further ado, let's just get on with it. The first thing that I read was Kindred Spirits by Rainbow Rowell, and that was a short story or a novella that I purchased on Kindle some time ago, but I forgot to read it, and finally I got around reading it. And as a fan of a fangirl and also Carry On, I was so happy to see another short story which may not have been in the same universe, but it also dealt with the same theme, being a fan of something. So this is a short story, or rather a novella, about a girl who's very much into Star Wars, so she decides to line up for the movie premiere, and she meets some people in that line. And line ends up being only 3 people, herself included. I found that story absolutely adorable. I love Star Wars, and I do not really consider myself to be a hardcore fan. I know that there are a lot of people out there who are much better fans than I can ever be, but I do love Star Wars, especially all movies. The episodes 4, 5, and 6 are my favorite, and just having all of that fan stuff and being mentioned in this short story, and about how people line up and what they're talking about and how they spend time together. It was also very reminiscent of my own experience at TIFF. If you don't know, pretty much every single year I go to Toronto International Film Festival, and when I join the queue of people who are also going to see the same movie as I do, especially in the rush line, it's just a completely different experience. It's like you can spend hours in that line in pretty much any weather conditions, and I've been in that line when it was raining and hailing and it was pretty chilly, and a couple of times I've spent about like 5 hours in the line, and you know what, it's completely worth it. And this sort of experience was so well captured in this short story. I gave this story 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I think it would be a very good story to read if you have never read anything by Rainbow Rowell and you're not sure whether you want to read Fangirl or Carry On or any other of her books. So I think this might be a very good starting point, and I definitely enjoyed it. It did not feel like completely fleshed out story. However, I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed it, and I do recommend you check it out. I think it's quite cheap on Kindle at the moment, so yeah, 4.5 stars. Next, I read volume number 12 of Chew, and this volume was called Sour Grapes. I've been waiting for this volume for months, I believe, ever since I read volume number 10. And I had such high hopes for this volume since it's the final installment of the series. The main protagonist has this magic ability of getting psychic impressions from whatever he eats, and there are a lot of, it's like a dystopian story in a way. In this world, people are prohibited from eating chicken, and he works for FDA and just like kind of investigates things, but at the same time has a lot of personal stuff which is happening. If you have read at least one issue of the series, you know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. I cannot really say what it's about because it's the final installment and the series is over, and I had such high hopes, like I said, but unfortunately I was slightly disappointed. I knew what would happen. I mean, the whole story was basically leading to a certain revelation, or so to say, certain outcome. However, there was that small part at the very end Also the fact that some of the characters were killed off. I'm not going to say who exactly, but all of that together disappointed me, and because of that I gave this volume only 3 stars, which is crazy because I was pretty much consistent with my 4.5 5-star ratings. And even though this volume also had one of those recurrent scenes, kind of like inside jokes, still, one of the reasons why I am disappointed is because I wanted a better ending for all characters, and I did not get that. And because of that, it made me really sad. That big revelation thing that everyone was waiting for was kind of obvious on one hand, and on the other hand, pretty much like a lot of things in this universe, it didn't make much sense. So yeah, kind of disappointed, but nevertheless, it's a very fun graphic novel series. I do recommend this series if you're a fan of bizarre graphic novels, if you're up to some weird humor, and if you have a strong stomach when it comes to certain things. Yeah, I do recommend it. I just wish it ended slightly differently. So, 3 stars. Next, I read another graphic novel, and that was The List by Keo McClear and Julia Sarda. I saw this book on Simon's channel, and I thought that it was very fascinating, so I got my copy from the library and I absolutely loved it. It's super short. It's basically just a couple of pages long, but it has amazing artwork, and it's a story about a family who were making lists of everything, and then one day there is someone who comes to their house, and just the story progresses. There's really not much to the story, but it's so magical realism, and it's so, in a way, relatable. If you've ever done lists of things, you would probably like this one. And I just liked the art. I just liked everything about it. I gave it 5 stars. It's super short. It's just fun. You can read it in 2 seconds. And now I wish I had my own copy, just because I really, really, really like this art. I really do. I seem to like really weird stuff, but what else is new? Next, I read Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and I actually started reading this book, I think last year or maybe earlier this year. I don't remember precisely when, and I read half of it, but back then I was not in the right headspace, so to say, to read this collection of poetry. Reason for that being because it's really heavy in content. It just talks about abuse, it talks about toxic relationships, sex, relationship with parents. It's just so raw in so many ways, and I absolutely loved this collection. I read it in one go on Kindle. I even purchased my own copy on Kindle because it was on sale, and I really, really enjoyed it. The collection also has some little illustrations by the author herself. I think it also adds to the story. I did enjoy it, but you just have to be aware that you cannot really go into this collection if you're not feeling mentally well, or if you're feeling that you might be triggered by something in this collection, because there is a lot of things that have to do with abuse and sex and all of that. So I mean, just be cautious when you read that. However, it's such a delightful collection. Delightful because there are some poems which are like completely prose poetry, and there are some poems that have a bit of a verse, and there are some poems that are just basically a couple of lines, and I really liked it. It's so unique and it's so different from what I personally, as something who was brought up with classic poetry, I found it really fascinating. Really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Just please be aware that it comes with a trigger warning. I gave this poetry collection 4 stars. Next, I read issue number 2 of Baker Street Peculiar's graphic novel series, and I was kind of meh about it. When I read the first issue, I liked the idea of, you know, Sherlock Holmes pastiches in a graphic novel format, and I kind of liked the characters, but at the same time, there wasn't much of a plot, and the second issue is pretty much the same. I understand that sometimes it's very difficult to get into comics or graphic novel series if you read issue by issue. I had the same issue with Lumberjanes, and I feel as if I might have had a better impression of the series if I waited and read the whole volume number 1, or say issues 1 to 5. But I'm reading issue by issue, and so far it's kind of meh. You know, I don't know really want to say else. I gave this issue 3 stars, and so far nothing really took me. You know, I'm not that engaged when I'm reading that, but I wanted something fun and sweet after reading rather heavy poetry collection, so that worked. And then I went back to some heavy stuff and read Wanjak by Joseph Boyden. And I know that I read kind of like a graphic novel mixed with lyrics album, The Secret Path, quite recently. And that was also about Charlie Wanjak, an ingenious boy who died tragically while trying to find his family back in the 60s. And I, without even knowing that I was going to basically read the book related to that same story, I checked this one out on Overdrive. I just had it on my wish list for a while, and it got delivered to my iPad, and then I was like, oh, wait a second, it's based on the same story. And I was really interested because I felt that The Secret Path was very original in terms of composition. It was very interesting, like the mix of graphics and lyrics, but there was not much to the plot. Even though I did end up giving that book 4 stars just for the sake of, you know, this being a very important story and a very important topic. However, I felt that the story was not very engaging for myself. But when I read Wanjak by Joseph Boyden, I was absolutely in love with the story. I felt that it gave more in-depth into the story, but especially for someone who is not very familiar with actual events. And I really enjoyed the lyrical way that the author portrayed what was happening. Absolutely horrifying on one hand, but also very, very lyrical on another, especially since the journey of this boy is told from the point of view of spirits and animals who are watching him go. And I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, no reservations here whatsoever. I do recommend you that you go and read this book. Since I read this book without knowing anything about the author and possible controversies surrounding him, I just decided to mention it while doing the review, because I'm not sure if any of you would make a decision whether to read a book or not based on the integrity of the author himself, but I just wanted to put it out there for you to know that there is something going on about it. But nevertheless, I loved this book, and I loved the poetical way of showing the journey of this boy. And it's just, you know what, till the very end, I know it was kind of silly, but till the very end I was hoping that there might be some twist that would save this boy, but yeah. Next, I read The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, and that is a graphic novel, and I really enjoyed it. This is a sort of spin-off or retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and I just want to say that I have a very love and hate type of relationship with Neil Gaiman's work. The reason for that being because some of his books I absolutely adore, and some of his books I absolutely hate, and there is no middle ground. I don't know why, but I don't like Sandman series. I don't like Stardust, but I really liked Neverwhere, and I really enjoyed some of the short stories. And thankfully, this graphic novel is the one that I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. It's very interesting, very whimsical, quite in the writing style of Neil Gaiman himself. A lot of twists, because if you think that you know the story of Sleeping Beauty, don't worry, it will not help you. You'll probably not see the ending coming like I did. I had no idea what was going to happen at the very end, and I was really surprised, but I really enjoyed it. I would say that probably the artwork was not my favorite. That's why I gave the story, like the graphic novel itself, 4 stars, but I really did enjoy it. So if you would like to read something short and whimsical by Neil Gaiman, please check this one out. Next, I read Lumberjanes Volume 4, and that was Out of Time, and I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars, which kind of surprised me because ever since I started reading Lumberjanes and I read volume number 1 and I really enjoyed it, when I got to the following issues and I decided for whatever reason not to read volumes but just to read individual issues, I lost my interest in the story by probably issue 11 or 12. I was a bit disappointed in the storyline. I stopped caring about characters, and I was really disappointed because things that were happening were so absurd and nothing was making sense, to the point that it just stopped being enjoyable. Because, you know, there are certain series when you can allow a certain level of madness or crazy stuff happening, and that's fine, but at some point it just gets a bit too much or nothing makes sense. I mean, like, for example, like dinosaurs attack in the middle of the camp. I mean, why dinosaurs? Why? But I digress. The thing about this volume is that it's one arc and it was contained to this particular volume. All those issues were only about one certain arc, and I did enjoy it. So I gave it 4 stars. It kind of renewed my faith, or so to say, hope in this series. But unless you're a fan of Lumberjanes, there's really no other reason why you would be reading this. I honestly believe that Noelle Stevenson did an amazing job with Nimona, but Lumberjanes is a bit of like a meh project. I'm not a huge fan of Lumberjanes. I was just pleasantly surprised that I read this volume and I liked it as much as I did. So 4 stars, a decent read, but nothing too spectacular. And the last but definitely not least is Lumberjanes and Gotham Academy issue number 1. That was actually the reason why I picked up Lumberjanes volume number 4. I had a certain feeling that I should get back into Lumberjanes world before jumping into this crossover series. And I was right, because definitely getting back into Lumberjanes world was kind of, you know, very helpful. Otherwise, I would have been even more critical than I was of this first issue of a crossover series. I felt that this first issue was kind of about, like, nothing. There was just really nothing happening. I mean, some things were happening, but otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to recall right now what was the story about. It was just so bland and non-memorable in any way. I did give it 3 stars, so it was a decent read, but nothing too spectacular. And once again, I think I'm falling prey to the same problem that I have with, you know, reading individual issues when there is no story arc. Things are just starting to develop, and yeah, maybe I should just wait and see when it gets to like a full 5 or 6 issues so I can binge read all of them. I don't know, if any of you are fans of Gotham Academy or Lumberjanes, please let me know if it's worth reading, because so far I'm kind of on the border about this. This is it, guys. This is everything that I read in 2 weeks while my parents were here. I think I did a pretty good job, considering that I had no time because I was working full-time and also babysitting my parents. Yep, that happened. So anyway, I'm so excited that I'm not skipping this weekly review and I can show you at least something. So yay, it feels very good to be back in front of the camera and filming. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye! I spent the first 5 minutes trying to figure out why white balance was so off on my camera. Turns out that I had it up to 2.0 because I was filming something in the dark weeks ago and I completely forgot about it. So cheers to not knowing how to use a camera. My parents were squirmish in any way. I always say squirmish, but it's actually squeamish. But let's get on with it. My nose. I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing this little fox over here. It's so cute. I love it.